This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Neat Sahone, and it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Today, we're going to take a look at Angels. Wizards of the Coast calls Angels the iconic creature type for white. This means they largely appear at higher rarities, they appear on pretty much every plane, and they really represent what white is all about. This isn't the first time I've looked at Angels in this series. I also did it back in March of 2020. But the list has changed enough over the last few years that it makes sense to do an update. If you're interested in the other end of the spectrum, I also looked at the worst Angels around in a video a couple weeks ago. Anyway, to be eligible for this list, a card had to have the Angel creature type or be capable of producing an Angel creature token. In all, there were 281 cards eligible for this list, and in this video we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. As usual, when I update a list, we'll also be taking a look at the cards that didn't make the list this time that were on it last time. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like regional championships. Alright, let's get started with a look at the 4 cards that didn't make the list this time that made it in 2020, starting with Angel of Serenity, which was at number 10 last time. This 5/6 flyer costs 4 generic and 3 white, and when it enters the battlefield, you can exile up to 3 other target creature cards in play or in graveyards. Then when it leaves the battlefield, you return those exiled cards to their owner's hands. This means the Angel can do a number of interesting things. You can just use it as a gigantic Banisher Priest that's capable of removing 3 of your opponent's creatures, but you can also use it to go after your own stuff. If you want to get some stuff back from your graveyard or rebuy an Enter the Battlefield ability, she can help you there. She represents a big enough threat that your opponent kind of has to kill her, and if you exiled some of your own stuff with it, it means that you're going to get some pretty serious value back. She saw a lot of play in block and standard control decks, but she's only gained a single point since 2020, that point coming in a Yorion deck in Pioneer. Blinking the Angel can allow you to generate even more value, but that 1 point wasn't near enough to make the list, as it now takes 46 points to come in at number 10. Next, there's Exalted Angel, which was at number 9 last time. It's a 6 mana 4/5 flyer, and she has pseudo lifelink. Really, the only difference from normal lifelink is the fact that her ability uses the stack instead of just happening instantaneously. She also comes with Morph, which means you can play her face down as a 2/2 for 3 generic mana. Then you can spend 2 generic and 2 white to turn it face up. While you do end up spending more mana, if that's what you do, it also means Exalted Angel can be face up and attacking on turn 4 without any ramp at all. And she's mostly been played in ramp decks in a variety of formats, since attacking with her as early as turn 3 is really great. In addition to being played in ramp decks and block, the Angel was also played in Astral Slide decks in both block and standard, which could exile the Angel while it's face down, only for her to come back as a 4/5 with lifelink. Her most frequent home in Standard, though, was Mirari's Wake decks, which were capable of flipping her very quickly. In Extended, she was played primarily in Tron, yet another deck capable of producing a bunch of mana. Exalted Angel these days is only legal in the Eternal formats, and it seems unlikely she'll ever see play there, and she hasn't gained any points since 2008, so she's never going to make her way back to the list. Next, there's Sagarda, host of Herons, which was at number 8 last time. This Angel costs 2 generic, a green, and 2 white, and it gives you a 5/5 with flying and hexproof, and she makes it so spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause you to sacrifice permanents. Sagarda is a pretty scary creature to be staring down, and is one of the hardest creatures to kill in the entire game. Her immunity to edict effects and targeted removal means that the only way you can get rid of her outside of combat is with board sweepers, and while you're trying to find one of those to take care of her, she's hitting you for 5 every turn in the air. So yeah, not a lot of fun if you aren't the one controlling her. In Standard, her primary home was Selesnya Aggro and several different kinds of control decks, as well as Bant hexproof decks, which took advantage of a bunch of creatures with that powerful keyword by putting auras on them. She has seen play intermittently in Modern as well, primarily as a sideboard card in decks like Collected Company and Amulet Titan. However, she doesn't have any points since 2018, and it's highly unlikely she'll ever make it back to the list. And the last card to make the 2020 list, but not make it this time, is Linvala the Preserver, which was at number 7 previously. Linvala costs 4 generic and 2 white, and she gives you a 5/5 flyer. She also has 2 enter the battlefield abilities. The first of these gains you 5 life if your opponent has more life than you do. The second gives you a 3/3 flying angel token if your opponent controls more creatures than you do. Linvala is pretty nice because she's very effective at getting you back in a game even if you're behind. If you're behind on life and creatures, you get an amazing deal of a 6 mana 5/5 flyer, a 3/3 flyer, and 5 life. That's going to stabilize you on a whole lot of boards, and not only that, you suddenly have 8 damage in the sky, which can end the game in a hurry. While she was played a significant amount in the main deck of many standard decks like Naya Aggro and Green-White tokens, she was played more in sideboards. This is because if you can't make at least one of these triggers happen, she just isn't very good. However, against aggressive opponents who quickly populate the board and lower your life total, she becomes one of the best cards in your deck, as those decks don't tend to have enough gas to deal with the life you gain back and the 2 big bodies you get from her. Linvala only narrowly missed making the list this time, but she hasn't gained a single point since rotating out of Standard, so it's fairly unlikely she'll ever find her way back on the list. Alright, with those out of the way, let's take a look at the list proper, starting with the number 10 card, which is Iona, Shield of Ameria, which didn't make the list last time because she fell short of the 29 points that were needed. However, she's done enough over the last few years to make it this time. Iona is a 7/7 flyer that costs a whopping 9 mana, but she definitely gives you 9 mana worth of value, since she also shuts down all cards of a specific color. And people generally don't pay the mana for her anyway. Her points have all come in decks that cheat her into play in the early part of the game, where she is nearly unbeatable. In Standard, this was achieved using Polymorph. In Extended, she could be reanimated by things like Dread Return. In Modern, she's been reanimated by Unburial Rites, and more recently cheated into play with Indomitable Creativity. Legacy, though, is where she's done the most work, and that's no real surprise, as that format has lots of great ways to cheat her into play, including more reanimation spells and Show and Tell. She's going to continue to be one of the most powerful things you can put in play in both Modern and Legacy, so it's likely she'll keep gaining points in the future. At number 9, it is Atraxa Grand Unifier, which didn't even exist back in 2020. In fact, it was only printed this year. For 3 mana, and 1 mana of every color but red, she gives you a 7/7 with Flying, Vigilance, Death Touch, and Lifelink, and she has an absurd Enter the Battlefield ability that reveals the top 10 cards of your library, at which point you get to put a card of each card type into your hand. In short, she's a huge, scary threat that also draws you a bunch of cards. All of that power means there are already decks in every format that are focused on cheating her into play. In Standard, she's been reanimated with the Cruelty of Gix. In Modern, she's been put into play with Indomitable Creativity. And in Legacy, she's put in play with Sneak Attack or Show and Tell. And in Vintage, she's seeing play in Oath of Druids decks. Basically, no matter what format you're playing right now, Atraxa is a card you're pretty likely to see in play. I think there's a real chance she'll be the number 1 card on the list someday. She's just seeing so much play in so many different formats right now that it's hard to imagine that won't happen. At number 8, it is Linvala, Keeper of Silence, who took a pretty big tumble from the number 4 slot she occupied last time. Linvala costs 2 generic and 2 white, and she is a 3/4 flyer that shuts down the activated abilities of all of your opponent's creatures. Notably, the effect is not symmetrical, and it even shuts down mana abilities. She saw some play in standard decks, like Fauna Quest, which was a toolbox deck that could tutor her up with Fauna Shaman whenever she was at her best. Linvala amassed the most points in Modern during the days of Birthing Pod dominance. This is another card that allows you to tutor her up in the right situation. Even after the pod got banned, toolbox decks in Modern continue to run Linvala for a while, although she has only gained 2 points since 2020, and both of them came in Heliod combo decks. She's likely to gain more points in the future, but gone are the days where she was a heavily played card in Modern, and she's in real danger of falling off the list in the near future. At number 7, it is Entreat the Angels, which was at number 6 last time. This sorcery costs 2x and 3 white mana, and it puts X 4/4 white angel creature tokens with flying on the battlefield. It also has Miracle, which means if it's the first card you draw in a turn, you can reveal it and pay an alternate cost, which in this case is X white. Obviously, for this to really do the job, you want to be able to cast it for the Miracle cost, which can allow you to cast it at instant speed during your opponent's turn, which often means you can untap and win the game with an Angel army. While it was played in formats like Block, Standard, and Modern, Legacy is by far the format where it's done the most work. That format has lots of cards that let you manipulate the top of your library. This was particularly true when Sensei's Divining Top was legal in the format, which it isn't now, but it still sees play in control decks in the format, including in Miracle-centric decks. Brainstorm, Ponder, and Sylvan Library can all help you stack the top of your deck to allow you to draw Entreat at the exact right time. It's going to keep on gaining points in Legacy and is a reasonable shot at continuing to remain on this list. At number 6, it is Lyra Dawnbringer, which was at number 5 last time. She costs 3 generic and 2 white and is a 5/5 with flying, first strike, and lifelink. She's also an Angel Lord. She gives all your other angels +1/+1 and lifelink. Big, flying creatures with lifelink are often a big problem. They make it pretty impossible for your opponent to race, because every time it hits an opponent, it creates a gap of 10 life between the two of you. On top of that, because she has first strike, this means she can even hang back and block effectively as well. It was played primarily in more aggressive decks in Standard like Vehicles, Boros Aggro, and even the Boros Angels deck, which could get maximum value out of Lyra Dawnbringer's ability to buff Angels. Lyra has been played in Modern too, primarily in the sideboard of blue-white control decks. Against more aggressive opponents who don't play much removal that can deal with a 5/5, Lyra Dawnbringer can be pretty insurmountable thanks to all those keywords. In Pioneer, where it's gained all of its points since 2020, she's primarily shown up in control decks. She's going to keep gaining points going forward and could move up the list. At number 5, it is Emerias Call, which didn't even exist back in 2020. It's a sorcery that costs 4 generic and 3 white, and it creates 2 4/4 angel tokens with flying. It also makes all of your non-angel creatures indestructible until your next turn. This often means you add a substantial threat to the board, and the rest of the board becoming indestructible usually means you can either attack or block really effectively. However, if that's all Emerias Call was, it probably wouldn't see any play. What really makes it great is the fact that it's a modal double-faced card with a land on its other side. This means you can choose to play it as either Emerias Call or Ameria Shattered Skyclave, a land that taps for 1 white mana, and it can enter the battlefield untapped if you pay 3 life. In other words, this is a land with big late-game upside. You don't actually access the upside all that often, but having it available is free, since this is a land that can even enter untapped. This has led to it seeing play in every format, and it also means it has a pretty decent shot at moving much higher on the list in the future. At number 4, it is Baneslayer Angel, which came in at number 3 last time. She's not too different from Lyra, who we saw earlier. They both cost 5 mana for a 5/5 flying first strike lifelinker, but this angel comes with protection from demons and dragons, while Lyra was an Angel Lord. Like Lyra, Baneslayer Angel provides a frightening finisher that will be able to put the game out of reach for many opponents with just 1 or 2 swings. The Angel was part of the Cobblade deck that dominated Standard in 2011. She's also gained a few points since a recent Standard legal reprint, primarily in white weenie decks. She also has picked up some points in Extended, in decks like Zoo and Blue-White Control, and in Modern, she's primarily been a sideboard card in roles very similar to Lyra Dawnbringer, unsurprisingly. She's also gained points in Blue-White and Esper control decks in Pioneer, but Lyra Dawnbringer is much more frequently used in that format, and that means it's pretty likely that Lyra will overtake Baneslayer Angel in the future. At number 3, it is Geist of St. Traft. It didn't make the list last time, but this seems to have been a mistake on my part because it actually had the same number of points in 2020 that it has now. Geist of St. Traft is a 3 mana 2/2. Those are not the most efficient stats at first glance, but he also comes with hexproof, and he makes a 4/4 flying and attacking angel every time he attacks. This means Geist represents a ton of damage for a very low cost. It's been a win condition in control decks, and a card that aggro decks want to play too, especially aggressive decks that have auras or other effects to make Geist really scary. The one downside he has is how easily he dies in combat, but auras and equipment can make that a lot harder for your opponent. It was played a ton in Standard, especially in blue-white Delver decks, which like to put Rune Chanter's Pike on Geist, and he was also played in Aura-centric decks. In Modern, its most frequent home has been blue-white Control. He's been featured in Legacy Stoneblade as well, but he hasn't gained points in a while, and it seems likely he will be passed by some of the cards behind it in the future. At number 2, it is Archangel Avacyn, which was also number 2 last time. She's a 5 mana 4/4 with flash, flying, and vigilance, and she makes your creatures indestructible until end of turn when she enters the battlefield. Her upside doesn't even end there. She can also transform into a larger creature who does 3 damage to the whole board. The design there is kind of cool because you don't have complete control over when it happens, and your opponent could potentially take advantage of it, but you're still kind of coming out ahead since you have a huge flyer that will survive the effect no matter what, while also doing 3 damage to your opponent. She was basically a staple in white decks in Standard, regardless of whether the deck was aggro or control. All of her abilities make it pretty easy to get 2 or even 3-for-1s out of her, and that makes her devastating. While almost all of Avacyn points did come in Standard, she's also gained a point in Modern, and she sees some play in Pioneer as well, but she's only gained 1 point since 2020. So far, her performance from before 2020 has been enough to keep her really high on the list, but it seems like she's going to get passed in the long run. And at number 1, it's Restoration Angel. She's a 4-mana 3/4 with flying and flash, and she can blink a creature when she enters the battlefield. So, she not only brings efficient stats that can allow her to eat an attacking creature when you flash her into play, you can also play her in response to a removal spell, allowing your creature to dodge it. She can also be used to abuse creatures with enter the battlefield or leave the battlefield abilities. One of the nastier things you could do with her in Standard was blink a Thragtusk with her. Since it would then both leave and enter the battlefield every time you blinked it, you would get both of those triggers. She can also work as a combo piece, as if you combine her with Kiki Jiki, she allows you to blink Kiki over and over, allowing you to make infinite copies of Restoration Angel. She just does a whole lot for 4 mana, and having flash is what really makes her amazing. She's only gained 3 points over the last 3 years, but she has such a big lead that she'll probably remain in the number 1 slot for a while, though I would imagine in the long run, Atraxa and Emerias Call are fairly likely to pass her. So, those are the top 10 angels in Magic. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to own any of these powerful angels, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to catch up on past videos, including many more that look at specific creature types, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. And lastly, if you want to go the extra mile in supporting me and the channel, you can do that by becoming a channel member or a patron. Check out the description to find out how to do those things. Thanks for watching.